Do any of you guys remember the time where Professor X had to stop Magneto to save the world? The Professor X-Magneto relationship has always been like a game of chess. We've got two brilliant minds with opposing strategies and opposing morals. Magneto almost always has the upper hand because of this thing, preventing Charles Xavier from using his powers on him. But there's one issue of Ultimate X-Men from 2001 that flips the board and shows just how powerful Professor X really is. In this storyline, Magneto's at his peak, and he's using Sentinels to take over Washington, D.C. The X-Men are doing their best to stop the Sentinels, but Magneto is just taking over. He even has the president on the White House lawn, and he's there to beg for his life. That's when Professor X shows up, and he says, "You and I need to have a serious talk." Because of his helmet, he can kind of treat Professor X like a joke. He just tosses him in his wheelchair with no remorse. And while he's monologuing at Charles, Wolverine just manages to sneak up on him and get him right in the back. This is actually one of the few times I can remember that Wolverine manages to sneak Magneto. It's pretty short-lived because, as you know, Wolverine's made of metal, so Magneto can just sort of get rid of him whenever he wants. Things take a turn when Quicksilver decides that his dad's gone too far and he needs to do something. He zooms to Magneto, takes the helmet off of him, and just like that, Professor X is in his mind and says, "Hello, Eric." That's where we get this moment where Magneto just says something super out of pocket. And through all of this, Magneto kind of has this moment where he explodes, and we're led to believe that he is unalived here, but Charles doesn't really take that approach. Instead, a few issues later, we're going to find out that Professor X put a psychic dampener on Magneto's brain, kept him alive, and now he's working as a social worker and has no memory of his life as Magneto. For once, the power of Charles's mind completely dominates Magneto's, which is something we don't often see. Something funny to note is that Magneto actually goes up to them, not knowing who they are, and he's like, "Do either of you have the time? This is the third watch that I broke this week." And then he looks at Charles and he's like, "Do I know you?" And Professor X just says, "No." Another thing that makes the relationship so fascinating is that issues later, Professor X is going to seek guidance from this version of Magneto, who is just a normal man, but they still have their friendship deep down. At this point in the story, Professor X is really going through it. He feels like mutants and humans maybe shouldn't coexist, and he wants to know what this version of Magneto thinks. He finds that if Magneto was just a normal human, he would have a completely different view on society. He feels that we can coexist and that the X-Men are doing good things for society. This actually causes Professor X to break down and Magneto to hug him, and he's just like, "Thank you, Eric. Thank you for telling me that." The chess game doesn't stay in Professor X's favor for very long because something ends up happening where Beast is kind of manipulated, and the Brotherhood of Mutants figure out that Magneto is still alive and they have to go save him. Magneto is freed by the Brotherhood, and he even writes in the sky, "Thank you, Charles," which I think is pretty cool because that means something about that experience Magneto actually learned. I love the relationship between Professor X and Magneto. We don't often get to see Professor X on the winning side of their fights, but when we do, it's always awesome. It really showcases Charles's unique mind and how powerful being a telepath really can be. What did you guys think? Is this Professor X at his best, or did he go too far?